Welcome to the Engagement Index. This week it's me and Lynn.
It is,
We
yes.
are here talking about everything to do with putting people in the middle of your campaigns, why that matters so much, why, from an internal comms perspective, do people matter in the work that you do?
Okay. I've got a lot to say about this.
No, that's not like you. That's not like you.
I think firstly, we talk about putting people in the middle in all of our work, whether it's external comms or internal comms.
Yeah.
And I think it might be interesting for us just to remind each other why we thought that was important.
Yes.
Because we've been talking about it for a long time.
We have, yeah.
Like separately from the engagement index, we've always believed that people can tell great stories, and internally we focus on how we get employees to do that. It's in addition to leaders, but really around employees. And externally, you focus on it how.
And customers, using customers as case studies, brand advocates, and employees sometimes as well, if they're helping to tell the brand story. I had this exact conversation yesterday with someone actually around internal and external comms. They're not actually opposites of each other. No. They just happen to have the int and x at the beginning and end of each other. What joins together what we do is the people in the middle piece, because it's about getting human storytelling out as a method of engagement. And I think that's really the hook of why we're talking about this today, because in the Engagement Index report, we found that 6 out of the 10 most relatable moments had that relatability and had people in them.
Yeah.
And that was the common thread. And I think it's the common thread in the report, but it's also the common thread that really joins together what we do internally and externally.
I think if I said to one of my clients, let's say an internal comms director, it's really important that we put people in the middle of this message. They would think, well, of course we do that, because we're a business full of people, but they don't.
Often people say
they do, but we're talking about it in a very specific way. The way we talk about it in the work that we do is we talk about employees creating content and peer-to-peer content, and just how different that is from hearing a message from one of the leadership team versus hearing it from your mate Dave, who works across the desk from you every day. And as an employee, it feels very different to hear campaign messaging from a fellow employee. So for us on the inside, putting people into the messaging is massively important. And also we do it quite literally in terms of, well, we've heard from the CEO and that was great, and we've heard from X member of leadership team and that was great. How do we actually hear from everybody who needs to talk about this message, and why would we bother doing that? And we bother doing it because it gets such a fabulous result when it comes to engagement. So people like to see people who look like them.
Yes.
That's one of the insights that, if you looked at, say, the Edelman Trust Barometer, they talk about, do I trust my CEO more than I trust a journalist? Do I trust a politician more than I, trust a teacher, and so on? And some of the insights that we got from the Trust Barometer, probably about 5 years ago now, was people really trust people who look and sound like them.
And we've got very similar research that we did ourselves that looked around people are more likely to buy into a brand for a first time, or buy a product or service from a brand when someone in the press is talking about it who looks and sounds just like me.
Right.
And I think that is so important, because this shows this isn't just about vanity or you or me having brilliant ideas, which of course we do.
Yes.
It actually ladders back to the bottom line. And the next step from in that series of research we did was that found that 50% of people needed to feel brand warmth before they would buy into the brand for the first time. And the way you build that brand warmth is by putting people in the middle, because you're building that empathy, you're building that engagement through people talking to people.
Yeah, I think one of the most important factors and outcomes rather that you get from using these kind of techniques is so much credibility as a brand.
I totally agree.
So I think what we've talked about, say particularly over the last 12 months, is we've been doing a lot of work like this for a long time now, in terms of really focusing on employees telling stories internally, and really focused on customers sharing stories externally.
Yeah.
And now what we can see happening is this kind of crossover between employees being used a lot more than you would typically have seen a few years ago in external campaigns.
Definitely.
So who have we seen? Currys
have used them. I think. I mean, we've been given briefs on work similar to this, where we've been asked, like, how can we talk about what we're doing on the front line?
Yeah.
And I think a few years ago, that wouldn't have been work that would have gone external, or taken externally. Now I think there is more demand to see behind the curtain, and your employees are great advocates for that. We've done work with Amazon, showing rather than telling what it's like to work in a business, and also allowing those people to have a face and a voice. I mean, often I think this approach is really powerful, particularly we found that with brands that are quite struggle to be seen as quite faceless. Big corporates, a big, it just looks like a brick wall from the outside. But if you can bring your people, your strongest advocates who are proud to work there, that really starts to say, like, actually there's people in here, ordinary people just like you and me. So it works from an employee and recruitment perspective, employee retention perspective. People are really proud if they see, you were talking about, Dave in the call centre, they're more likely to go and read, be proud of where they work if they see Dave then in the Times talking about the business. There's a sense of pride there. And I also think it really helps, it can help a brand as well. If you're a brand that struggles with, we hear this a lot, every time we go out, we get a kicking in the press. And so you get to this point where people just retreat, and they don't do anything proactively. If you take your employees or your customers out as case studies, that can protect the brand, because they can talk about the brand and not maybe get asked the difficult questions that perhaps if you take the CEO out, he's going to get asked, he's fronting your wonderful new campaign, but the journalist is going to want to talk about your share price or, a different difficult topic that's come up.
And I guess it's a lot easier to critique a brand than it is to critique
someone who works
Janet
there.
who works for the brand.
Yes. Did Janet and Pete know each other?
And Dave.
That's
their child. I also think, as we're talking, like years ago when I worked in house and I was a brand manager, I used to, because a lot of people say we involve our employees in our advertising, but we were doing this decades ago, where I would insist on taking employees and bringing them into the experience that the creative experiences we were building as a brand, whether that's advertising, whether it was, I recruited a whole team to work at Glastonbury every year when that was one of our sponsorships, and all the music partnerships that we did. And you just, that's where this really began in terms of the type of work that we do now. That's where it kind of came from, around, we can get you involved and show you behind the curtain, but how can we push that forward? And I think that's what we've naturally done. I don't hear any other agency talk about internal influencers the way we do.
Or influencers, as we've coined them.
Going to come on to, which obviously I would never take credit for influencers when it was your very own thought. And that came from trying to understand, I guess it was the perfect storm of content was becoming just more and more of a focus point internally, certainly from our perspective. How do you view content the same way you would view it when you're building it externally? And also, how do you look at user-generated content? So if you stick into Google UGC, you'll get a million articles about user-generated content. We then kind of said, well, what about employee-generated content? And you stick EGC and you get nothing, right? So, and that was where we had the conversation around internal influencers, but if they were employees, what would they be called? Influencers, which is quite challenging to say, but we still keep saying it.
And I think another thing that you did that I found really interesting was training them up.
Yes.
So it wasn't just putting them on camera, that's sort of level one of this. You taking this up to the next level, training them, equipping them with that skill set, because we did some work with Admiral at the start of the year about their employee value proposition, and that talked about people, particularly Gen Z, looking for not just a job for life, but an employer for life. So staying with the same employer, but doing different jobs in that business, but staying longer. So keeping recruitment costs down, building that loyalty. And that really reminded me of what you were doing here, because actually you're upskilling your employees, you're making them want to stay in the business. So, I mean, you should really tell me about this because it's your work, but tell us about how that came about.
Well, I think from a content creation perspective, which is how we would now look at it, the very first influencer program we ever created here at Goldbug was around the launch of 5G over at EE. And I'm someone who was involved in 3G, who launched 4G. so obviously I had to be involved in 5G, but we didn't have 2G. We just used to call it the network,
Yeah.
just from an aging perspective. And 5G was really technical. It was a very complex tech story to tell. 4G was super easy. It was just, it's fast, it's really fast, it's faster than fast. 5G was really, really challenging. And we knew that we had to kind of make this technology really understandable, particularly for the frontline, because a customer is going to walk into the retail store in Brixton High Street and say, what is 5G?
Yeah.
Froze. How do I explain it to my mum in, kind of 3 easy sentences? And we just knew that the best shot we could have at this were people who were dealing with customers every day. And so we recruited this team and we trained them to understand everything about 5G, how to talk about 5G, how to simplify the message for customers, and importantly, how to create content that we could use in the comms channels internally, so we could spread this right across the organisation.
Yeah.
And it was so successful that it did a number of things. Firstly, it was brilliant for that brand launch and brilliant for the business and the launch campaign. But it also allowed us to create a model of what we now know to be our internal influencers, aka our influencers, and fine-tune how we can take a group of employees, train them on how to make content, how to kind of share messaging in a real peer-to-peer and really easy to understand way, and also give them an additional experience at work. So it's we are kind of upskilling people internally who might never have thought about learning how to create content or learning about social media techniques and applying that to their internal job. So it's a program that's done many, many things, all of which ladders right back to almost personifies putting people in the middle of your content, not just getting them to tell the story, but actually to create the story. So it's been hugely successful. We won our first award for internal influencers, and we just continue to do that. And it's kind of taken that concept of a brand ambassador internally who, might give out a leaflet or wear a T-shirt at an event, and it's completely redesigned that whole concept.
And I think because it really riffs off of what's happening outside in the influencers world, it's bringing that into business. And I don't know if anyone else is doing anything like that. And it's so clever because it's for that simplicity, particularly I think with younger, I'm assuming it resonates really well with the younger people in the business, because they're seeing that, but they're also learning how to do it themselves. They're replicating the same
trends they'll see on TikTok.
But it just gives the brand, coming back to what we were saying about faceless brands, it's building that personality and that richness and that warmth. And I think I imagine it must do really well from a recruitment perspective, because it's showing people at the same time, like vicariously, what it's like to work here. This is a good place to work.
And if you think about external comms, think about a spokesperson said, right?
Oh, my favourite sentence.
And how, linking back to that insight around putting a face to the brand, I know from years and years and years in brand management, you cannot convince your employees of your brand strategy based on your external advertising. You just can't. They're
different audiences.
It's a different audience, but employees can just sense when BS. Better than anyone, if they see you kind of communicating externally about a business that they're like, who's that? Then immediately that disconnect happens. So getting people to talk with an authentic voice around the brand they work for, both internally and externally, that's where you want to be with putting people in the middle, I would say.
And I think from our backgrounds in journalism, that it comes back to the similar point around, like you were talking earlier on about people or product or brand. A brand can't speak, a product can't speak.
No.
But people can talk about what the product or brand has enabled them to do or helped them do. And that is a form of communication that you can land through press, but also through social, because it's a story you can tell. There's only so many times I can say that's a really good pen. It's a really good pen. It's still a really good pen. It's just a pen. But if you can talk about what that pen's helping you do, or enabled you to do, or it's helped you achieve, or a moment that you remember from that, that's a much more powerful and resonant story. And I think that for me is really where using those customers as case studies comes in, because the brand then becomes the enabler, the rocket fuel behind the storytelling. And I find it's interesting where brands are open to that, to rather than just having their product and their name, they understand that they're there to almost elevate their customers. That's a good place to be, and that's a much more authentic story to tell. And what you were saying about like people calling it out, they can feel the other thing that we're talking about, that's advertising. But this is communication. This is about how I connect with you and you connect with me, because we're talking peer-to-peer, person-to-person, and using authentic storytelling to do that. And that's where, coming back to that engagement, that's why I think you get this higher engagement, because people know that they're being talked to honestly and you know, without the BS.
And I think certainly in the type of content that we would work on with our internal influencers would be totally unscripted. There'd be certainly no media training or anything that even resembled that. It would be unscripted, unguarded, real, genuine, honest views around things that are going on inside the business, products that are being sold, and demoing and testing things. It's a real open environment, and I think that also adds to the trust and the credibility because it's so authentic.
And I suppose that's a version of what externally, I mean, that's what influencers have been doing for a while anyway. But if you can take those case studies, customer case studies, out into press, a reader doesn't think, oh, this has been placed. They think it's been chosen, and it gives that third party credibility and you know, third party endorsement from the press that you don't get just from, well, you wouldn't get from advertising, and you don't get from the CEO talking. It looks like he's just there or she's just there to talk about whatever the business objectives are for the year. It's much more of a business story, but that if it's really looking for about product and what the brand can do and how it can support people, those case studies are the most powerful thing. I think one of the problems I hear about a lot is it being done. This is similar to what you said earlier. People saying they're putting people in the middle, saying it's being done. The version I hear a lot is, oh, we've got a case study, and then you look at the case and it's like, but that case study doesn't actually relate to the story we're telling. It's just a person. A case study doesn't just mean a person. No. That case study has to mirror the experience and the narrative. So, and sometimes I think that's often maybe where people fall down. They've just got a person. Do you have an equivalent on your side?
Do we have an equivalent? I think there's I don't know whether we've got an exact equivalent, but I do wonder about, I guess back to that point around brand ambassadors, and you know, we use our people in everything we do, and one of them was at a conference the other day, and you know, so nobody saw it, no one knew about it. So again, just even the concept of it being influential is failing. So it's we do it very differently. We've got a very different take on it, and I think we've taken it up so many levels, but we know that this type of work ladders back into the things that really matter to brands around building all of the building on all the metrics that they care about, certainly internally around retention, and also showcasing their work and culture out, whether it's through their employer brand work. You know, we use a lot of the content that we create with employees externally on social media, on LinkedIn and so on. So it's a brilliant way of talking about your brand in a very real and honest way.
I would totally agree with that on externally as well, because I think often we might get a brief that a client might say, look, we're just really struggling with this, or we've given it to another agency and they just can't crack it, because they're trying to tell the story so straight. But actually the case study storytelling allows them to get into press through a back door, through a way that they might not have thought of, because we're leading with their story rather than just trying to hit journalists over the head with a brand product story, which journalists are just going to shut the door and they're not interested in. I sometimes describe it's like a Trojan horse. If we can get that case study in, because their story is very strong, we can then unpack that messaging in there, and that's where that sort of those tentacles really spread out and you can really land that piece. Where do you think it will go next? Because I think I can see with what you've done, it's almost, because you're following what's happening outside. Have you got any ideas on that, or is it too early to say?
I think, well, the key thing is trends. So we have to, because it's not just using employees in your content, it's what are they doing and how do they, and then the more relevant you can make their content, then the better it is for the channel. So again, you know, if we take the horror of a TikTok dance, for example, and trying to get employees
you love a TikTok dance.
I mean, I do love TikTok. But finding the relevant trends
Yes.
and being on time. So if you think about
Yeah.
kind of news jumping, like the equivalent of that internally, it's,
Yes.
you know, it's kind of, you've got to get that right.
Can you?
Can't be late. No.
I saw this on TikTok 3 months ago.
No.
Finished. Yeah.
So I think there's you've got to keep plugging in, and that's on, you know, and certainly on all of our team, that is expected of everybody, that they really are plugged into not just the news cycle, but everything that's happening in social media. And so we're picking up those trends as soon as they're happening, or we can see that they're coming. And not everything will pivot into an internal audience. So that's the second part of this. Around a lot of the time we're using people to create content internally. It's not their day job. It's not they're not really trained as, you know, digital natives or social media experts. So it can really elevate and bring a lot of fun and flavour to your content to make it more social. But we're also very mindful of reasons that things wouldn't work externally. So if you think about just influencers in their most kind of general term, as you know, I'm obsessed with BeautyTube and all things on beauty YouTube. You have to really make sure that your audience trusts you. So you've got to show when you're being endorsed, or whether you've been given a PR product, or, you know, all that kind of stuff. So that level of credibility and authenticity has to happen internally. So I think they're the things that we would always keep an eye on around what is happening outside, and how can we kind of match that trend, or get in line with that trend, or beat it in some way, and kind of take it a little bit further.
Why do you think this matters so much more now? Like, why does it matter that people see employees more than, not necessarily more than, but as much as the CEO?
I think two things. Firstly, the type of content that they produce is much more lined up to the content they're consuming every day.
Yes.
So swipe, short form. It's, you know, that we deal with so many insights around the things that can impact us in work based on external trends that are happening in the world. So we know that people are looking for more short form content, and we have to respond to that. So I think from the actual content itself, I think that's really important. And secondly, it's kind of it's the mix, the blended voice, I guess, in terms of, I've heard it must be true. I've heard it from my leader, I've heard it from my manager, I've heard it from the CEO of this company, and I've now heard it from a team over here. It's kind of really just bottoms out all the messaging in terms of, not only do I understand it, I know what it means to me in my role.
Yes.
So I've made it more relevant. So I think they're the two critical factors. Content, the content that is produced is just brilliantly bang on trend. So it feels like you're that, you know,
it's in your world.
It's in your world.
Speaking to you in a language and
that you understand.
That you understand.
Not, you know, the days of getting long emails and, you know, people expecting people to be able to read through that level of comms. That just doesn't work. And also just the blended voices, I think, is really important.
And I think from an external perspective, I think it's you know, we are in an age of transparency. People want to see behind the curtain, and, you know, what I was saying earlier on around how you know, it's not, you can be seen as a faceless brand. You can choose to stay that way if you want to. There is an option to do that. So but what we're saying is that that transparency, the brands that show that transparency are doing and will do much better. So it's a way and a technique to show that to the outside world. But I actually think it's it's a safer and protected way to do it. So it protects the brand, but also showcases a lot of the good. I mean, you must have the same thing. You go in, you know, meet a client, and they talk about just how great their people are, yet the brand reputation could be in the toilet.
Right.
And how do you reconcile those two things? And I think people in the middle is so powerful for being able to do that, because going back to what you said, it's so hard to argue with that. You can't say somewhere is a terrible place to work. If I'm showing you a video, an authentic video that we, you know, a content creation video rather than something that's been filmed like secretly, of people, they look happy, you know, it's showing, not telling. They look happy at work, they're enjoying themselves. And when we do this kind of content as well, we don't get them to talk just about being at work. We try and get them to talk about themselves, or show them as people, show them as more rounded personalities, because that again helps you see, you know, that old style of video where they might involve employees would be the employee literally just saying what the CEO was saying,
Yes.
you know, standing in front of a camera and
I mean,
staring.
that is a thing, right? In terms of, you know, those kind of down the lens boardroom.
Terrifying.
The plant. Is there a plant behind us?
There's a plant. Yeah,
it's
it's like a hostage video.
It is like a hostage video in terms of like even just shifting things up around, you know, a lot of the content that we will train people to do around interviewing someone, not the way that you as a journalist would have been interviewing someone, but how to walk and talk with and capture that content, how to do a sit down and capture that content. And I think from a C-suite perspective, I've not met any leadership team who doesn't love this type of work, right? Because they get to connect with their people at a completely different level, and it kind of cuts down a lot of those, you know, kind of barriers around too much royal energy going on between the leader and people who are working further down the chain. But it's a brilliant way to connect with your internal audience.
So if someone was looking at doing this for the first time, I think this is a good place for us to sort of take stock and think about conclusions and recommendation. What would be your recommendation for someone who is looking to put people in the middle of their next campaign?
Obviously hire us to do that for them, of course. This is not about handing over the reins completely, right? None of this is easy to do. It never is. It's incredibly rewarding, but you do need to be following a really structured process.
You need to do it right. And I think that comes back
to make it look effortless.
Yes,
there's so much work that goes into it. So
like me getting up in the morning.
Correct. So there's so much work that goes into it. So you need to work. Your comms team must be front and center of all of this work. And so work with someone who is used to kind of creating this type of program and activity, and get your resources lined up internally to make it happen. One of the biggest things that we always say to clients that we're working with on influencer programs is the community management aspect internally. So make sure you've got a way of keeping this community talking to each other, keeping them motivated, and you know, and we can help clients with all of that. So I think it's not about handing over the reins and saying just pick up your phone and start kind of you know, filming everything at work. It's a really structured program that can have brilliant results, but also be really open about kind of what and where your employees can feature in your content. I think would be is a great piece of advice. And my favorite word, unclench.
Oh, I totally agree. Just relax, enjoy it, because it is
what
meant
are they
to look.
Say,
it's meant to look natural and authentic. It isn't like, again, the hostage video, you know, robot style. And I think the same from an external perspective. Like, allow it to happen. Allow the story to come out. Allow the person that we're using and working with to tell the story in their most natural and authentic way. And that will just reap dividends because of in the authenticity and the buy-in that you'll get on that storytelling by using, you know, a customer to tell your brand story or an employee rather than the CEO. I think that's a great place to leave it, because
it's a great place to leave it.
Thanks for watching, and we'll be back
on the next one.